Could Diddy get bail? May sound like a long shot, but is there something that could maybe change the judge's mind? Well, we're going to be speaking with the bail bondsman to the stars, Ira Judelson, about whether Diddy may get out in a rumored new bail package. He has been working with Diddy's team.
He walked into court as if he was still in charge. He stood tall and straight, with his shoulders back and chin clenched. This made it look like he thought the name Diddy still had legal weight. It was different in every way, though. There was no record coming out at this time.
The Sean Combs post-verdict world is what's next, right? After being convicted of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution and acquitted of racketeering conspiracy and 2 counts of sex trafficking, now we ask, what is his sentence going to be on those 2 charges, the Mann Act charges? And there's also another question that we're going to address today. Could he get bail? Could he get out? You might be saying, Jesse, wait a second. He was denied bail at every turn. And you would be right, he was. Despite proposing extensive bail conditions during the course of this legal saga, including a $50 million bail package and monitoring by private security personnel, the court was not convinced. Now, by law, the defense has the burden to prove that Combs is not a flight risk or danger to the community. And given the charges, the allegations, including that he was improperly trying to contact people in the case pre-trial, he was always denied release. But then there's what happened after the verdict last week. And this is an interesting conversation. And again, we're going to be speaking with Ira Judelson in a minute, who's been working with Diddy's team on possibly getting him released. But after the verdict, the defense applied for Combs to be released from detention pending sentencing. But that request was again denied by Judge Arun Subramanian. The defense argued, look, he's no longer charged with RICO, there's no longer presumption of detention, we have his passport, there's no access to private planes, there's no criminal history, this is his first conviction, he would be a fool to mess any of this up because he was just given his life back by the jury, he wasn't convicted of the highest charges. He was facing up to life in prison, now he's not. He should be allowed to return to his property, his mansion in Florida. There'll be a $1 million bond. Now, the government argued, look, Sean Combs, he was convicted of serious charges, Mann Act violations. There was physical abuse in this case. There was prolific use and distribution of drugs. He committed crimes while under investigation, including having drugs in his hotel room when he planned to surrender to federal authorities back in September of 2024. And Judge Arun Subramanian denied the bail application, sided with the government, that these convictions on these charges, by law, they trigger the mandatory detention statute, that the defense conceded Combs is violent. They conceded that at trial, quote, we own the domestic violence. That's what the defense had said. The judge also made the point that it was impossible for the defense to demonstrate that he poses no danger, particularly given his violence after the searches of his properties and when he knew he was under investigation. That's the whole Violent Jane episode, attacking Jane, one of the victims in this case. And also that the evidence at trial showed there was a years-long pattern of abuse and violence. But despite the judge denying Combs' release once again, and given that his sentencing has officially been confirmed for October 3rd, that was agreed by both the defense and the prosecution yesterday, could he get out beforehand? It's an interesting question. Let me bring in right now a special guest. I am joined by one of the most renowned bail bondsmen, probably in the country, definitely in New York, Ira Judelson. Ira, thank you so much for coming here on Sidebar, and pleasure to meet you.
You too, Jess. Pleasure myself.
Let's talk a little bit about what you do. Talk about what you do. I don't know if everybody completely understands the process and your role in it.
You know, it's funny. Not a lot of people understand the world of bail. They think that a bondsman just raises his hand and you know, that's where it ends. With me, it starts with the people that you meet, the lawyers, the judges, the DAs, hearing about a bail, putting it together.
There wasn't a news event here. There was no stage here. He could no longer control the story, and this was the last act. People were there to watch him fall, not to cheer for him. The judge looked composed, emotionless, and icy, as if they had read every word and page of every nightmare hidden beneath Diddy's name. Behind the wooden rail, the victims sat in silence. While some sat alone, others joined hands. They waited for the sentencing as if it were the end of a storm they had been caught in for decades, even though they all knew what was coming. Then it started. "Mr. Combs," the judge exclaimed, his voice resonating in the quiet room like thunder. No mitigating factors are found by this court. This court will now make your choice when the jury has made its. Diddy did not flinch. His attorneys looked to be statues. The quiet was overwhelming, yet photos were not allowed in the room. This sentence is given to you. At that point, the number fell. Not 1, not 5, but more years. More than anyone expected. Not probation. Not a half-hearted star rehabilitation agreement. Not a slap on the wrist.
A little bit of a tougher sentence than maybe the defense was expecting.
Well, look, I think the defense might be wanting to take advantage of this, right? Now, the judge said, even though I'm denying bail and I'm looking at the violence factor, it's not a preview of what I'm going to do for sentencing. But I think this is the opportunity for the defense to submit any kind of mitigating factors and have the probation officer speak to his friends and family and talk about the impact of this. I mean, we just interviewed Charlucci the other day. So I wonder if they're saying, you know what? They said to Sean Combs, listen, let's wait for October. Gives us more time to present our case to Judge Arun Subramanian. And then we had the hearing today. This monumental hearing.
Great.
You've been in court for 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day.
Yeah.
This was what, like 7 seconds?
I think maybe even less than, I would say
What
kind
happened?
of close to 5 minutes. So
Yeah.
get all the way down to the courthouse. I'm like seeing everybody
Which
from
is not
the trial.
close from here, so people know.
It's not. It's not. And it was hot outside too. So
all the way downtown,
walking
yeah.
all the way down, or not, I didn't walk all the way downtown. From the subway to the walk to the courthouse.
Okay.
Get there, check in on my stuff. I would say the security check-in was longer than the actual hearing.
Okay.
So it was a remote hearing. We didn't see Sean Combs in person. We didn't see any of the attorneys on both sides. We didn't even see the judge. And so what had happened was we get inside kind of the overflow room.
Oh, the overflow room, okay.
Yep. So we get inside the overflow room. There's a big giant screen. It's completely black, but then you hear Sean Combs' voice being like, Mark, are you there? And so it was kind of like one of those dial-in type of hearings. And so we heard Mark Agnifilo's voice. Then all of a sudden we hear the prosecution's voice. It was Christy Slavic. She was accompanied by Emily Johnson, both who work on behalf of the government. And then all of a sudden, Mark Agnifilo was kind of like, you know what, we were able to work everything out as far as our sentencing date goes. And then the judge's clerk is like, oh, okay, so both parties agree, and then this matter is adjourned.
And that was it.
Yeah.
I worried that's what was going to be because when they had the letter basically working out the date, I was like, oh, what are they going to talk about? And then after that hearing is when they switched it back to October 3rd.
Yeah.
So not much there. You didn't see Sean Combs. Okay, let's talk about some other things that have been going on. First of all, big news. There's a new lawsuit that came out against Sean Combs, okay? This is pretty disgusting. You have this unidentified John Doe who claims that in September of 2020, so relatively recently, he, Diddy, and others, they go to this warehouse out in LA that apparently contains some of the clothes of Notorious B.I.G., the rapper who was shot and killed in 1997, Sean Combs' friend. And people start taking drugs, they start wandering around this warehouse, and this John Doe claims that Combs started watching pornography on his phone, and that is when he claims, again, warning, pretty disgusting allegation, that Combs grabbed one of Biggie's t-shirts and pleasured himself with it, into it. I don't know how the best way to explain it. And even alleging that John Doe, or insisting that John Doe finish the job, so to speak. And he then claimed Combs threw the spoiled shirt onto John Doe and said, "Rip Biggie," then left. He also claimed that 15 years earlier, Combs told him to perform oral sex on him, reportedly suing for intentional infliction of emotional distress, sexual battery. Don't have a ton of information, but for somebody who has been following so many of the civil lawsuits that he now faces, 66, 67, 68, how does this...
Actual jail time. Real responsibility. Not a fancy wing. No plan for going. Only cruel and painful years. The courtroom split. Shocks. A woman choked back a cry. At last, one of the victims raised his head. However, did he? He lost his rage. His face turned white. His mouth moved, but he didn't say anything. When they did, they were raucous, angry, and insane. This is false. He shouted, "This is political. This cannot be done to me. This culture was made by myself." He wasn't begging. He made demands. He continued to pretend as though he was holding a microphone. He continued to think that his voice might affect reality. It wasn't a workshop, though. There was no version here. Truth doesn't require auto-tune in this courtroom. The judge stayed silent. He stayed still. Slowly and surely, as if they had been waiting for this, the courtroom cops entered. Did he, too? He burst forth. He yelled, "You people are animals."
His girlfriends, the cowboys, the agency leaders, the porn stars, and others walk free, as they should. If there was ever a fact pattern that was exceptional under the Mann Act, it is this one. And then they move on to another argument, that the Department of Justice, the DOJ, has usually only charged Mann Act violations when there's financial gain. And they even cite a number of cases in the Southern District of New York, where Combs was prosecuted, that apparently involved defendants that set up a prostitution business for profit. Again, trying to distinguish between Combs' conduct and these cases. He never did any of this for profit, they argued. And they even cite the 1953 U.S. Attorney's Manual that says, quote, "As a general rule, prosecution should not be instituted in the so-called non-commercial cases." And they claim the Department of Justice manual today, quote, "makes clear that the prosecution of customers involved in an 18 U.S.C. 2421 offense, like Mr. Combs here, is now limited to prosecuting those who engage in commercial sex with victims of sex trafficking, in addition to those who otherwise perpetrate or facilitate human trafficking offenses." And in the absence of any sex trafficking charge, however, it is clear that the standalone Mann Act counts never would have been prosecuted. That seems true. I think you ask any legal expert, they will say if all the government had against Sean Combs was the transportation to engage in prostitution charges, just the prostitution charges, they probably wouldn't have gone after him. They coupled it with racketeering and they coupled it with sex trafficking. I agree with that. I don't think that they would have gone after him just for that. Anyway, the defense highlights how modern day prosecutions of Johns is really when you're talking about exploiting vulnerable foreigners who don't speak English well, which again is not the case here. And they highlight how the only potentially comparable case in New York is where you had a retired police officer and a former judge who apparently hired women to have sex with a male fraternal group called the Jesters. But Combs' attorneys say, while there was no profit there, there's no profit here, there was sex trafficking of those prostitutes. That's what's different. Again, Combs was acquitted of sex trafficking in this case. And here's the main point, quote, "Moreover, the cases which involve defendants similarly situated to Mr. Combs have been released on bond pending sentencing. In reviewing the cases across the country where the primary or sole conviction was for a violation of 18 U.S.C. 2421, the defendants who were not charged with running a prostitution business have been released pending sentencing." And then Combs' attorneys make another argument for why Combs' conditions are exceptional. And it's about him being locked up at the MDC. They say that a district court judge in the Southern District in another case basically said how bad the MDC is. As Judge Furman noted, the state of affairs at MDC is unacceptable. In so noting, Judge Furman concluded that the conditions in the MDC qualify as exceptional reasons under the statute justifying, and this was the defendant in this case, Chavez's continuing release. Judge Furman found that the conditions at the MDC are, quote, "dreadful in many respects, but three warrant particular emphasis. 1. Continued reports of inordinate periods of lockdown. 2. Claims that the facility provides inadequate and or substantially delayed necessary medical care, a particular risk in this case. And 3. General issues about the conditions at the facility." These conditions have not abated in Mr. Combs.
Pulling cuffs from a belt, he struggled. "Do you wish to ruin what I've created? You think yourself virtuous because of this?" Silence was the reaction. For this was not a matter of destruction. Exposure was the problem here. The curtain was raised. There were no lights on. The truth was in the spotlight. His lawyers tried one final time. They asked for forgiveness. They mentioned his decades in the spotlight, his commercial efforts, and his charity activities. They claimed that this ruling was overly harsh. However, the prosecutor didn't even have to say anything. They had presented their case. Their proof had been strong. The defense was now asking for leniency from a system that their client had ridiculed from the beginning. The judge bent forward. "Mr. Combs, this has nothing to do with what you built. What you broke is what counts. It was people, responsibility, safety, and trust. Like all men before him, the king of bad boy swagger was freed as the cuffs snapped shut and the illusion broke. When the law revealed the truth, it stunned the entire courtroom, which had thought he was above the law. Even though the courtroom was empty, the sound of that moment could be heard well beyond its limits. The media storm outside exploded into a full-fledged frenzy. The jail car was seen moving away on camera. Both sides' protesters yelled over barriers. Justice was sought by one faction. Inside that car, it didn't matter that the other one cried conspiracy. Diddy sat in chains. Not in the back of a limousine, not in a house, not in fancy handcuffs. Just strengthened glass and cold steel. His jaw was clenched, his face flushed, as if he was still struggling to comprehend how this could be real. This face had once built global brands. Because he went through every charge like a ghost for decades. Lawsuits stopped. There were stories that died. The victims fell quiet. Behind him, the machine was too strong, too rich, and too interconnected. This time, however, there wasn't enough public relations magic to turn the truth into myth, since even the largest machines rust.
And you didn't tell me if it was unique. $50 million, right?
Yes.
You know, the idea of private security. It was an
Yes.
interesting argument because who would monitor him. It was interesting because the prosecution at one point had said it's not fair, right? He's a wealthy celebrity who's providing a bail package that other people in his similar position wouldn't be able to provide. Now, the defense was like, well, the only reason we're presenting a package like this is because of what he's accused of and his wealth and his resources. We have to address that in a certain way. The reason it's so extensive is because of his wealth and resources. That bail package that was put forward was rejected by the court. What did you make of that?
Well, at that time, the judge was looking at the RICO Act and sex trafficking. So, Puffy was looking at possibly 25 years, or more, depending on what the guidelines were based on if he was convicted. So at 55 years old, at that time, it's almost a life sentence. So, and he has a lot of wealth and he had a private plane. So the judge was looking at that. Plus, in the federal system, they look at danger to the community. Where in the state system, they're not allowed to look at that. They look at risk of flight. So I think with all the letters behind that were coming in that we were not really privy to from a lot of the alleged victims, I think the judge made a decision that, hey, this is not going to be sufficient enough. I thought that at the end, he kind of, when we brought in our private security team and we showed him who was going to be doing it, we did Sam Bankman-Fried. So we knew that, we would be completely covered on that end. And we gave him the idea of there would be no Wi-Fi in the building that we were looking at, and that he would not be able to really be able to connect with anybody but his legal team and his family. We thought at that point that maybe we had a chance, but at the end, the judge denied it, and that's where we stood. And now on this case coming forward, after the convictions, after he wasn't convicted, at the end, we didn't know what he was going to do. So, when Mark reached out to me afterwards, we started thinking about putting another bail package together.
And what is that bail package and by the way, is this a bail package that you think could be submitted again even after the judge just denied bail?
Well, the judge denied bail based on the statute, and the statute stated a certain amount of information that part of the Mann Act that, was not eligible for bail. There are certain circumstances that can be done. We're going to regroup again. I know that they were going to go talk to Mr. Combs again and see what happens there. They have the October 3rd date. And I don't know where he stood. As of the other day, he wanted to get out. I don't think anybody wants to be at MDC where he is. So we're going to reconvene and see what happens, at a later date. We could go back with another package.
Would it require him to stay in New York? Would it be him to be, I know he wanted to go back to his property in Miami, Florida. And there's also an interesting question, I think, that his defense put forward. He just got his life back. That's what they said. He wasn't convicted of the top charge.
Victims gathered in the courtroom hallways. With the load of years now being lifted, some stood in quiet, some hugged, and some sobbed. This was responsibility, but it wasn't closure because nothing returns what was taken. And that in itself was so rare that it seemed miraculous. Diddy's lawyers rushed to respond. Requests for sentence adjustment, emergency appeals, medical concerns, and mental health claims were all filed within hours. He wasn't a flight risk, they said. For someone of his status, that incarceration would be perilous. However, since the court had previously heard the worst of it, none of it was effective. The statements weren't merely charges. They were images of devastation. Victims recalled one after another how charm evolved into coercion, how power turned into a weapon. Parties and news were never the only topics. It was about deception, control, and fear-induced quiet. Additionally, the court heard more than just guilt when the decision was dismissed. It identified a pattern, a technique, and a history of harm concealed in plain view. It didn't help when Diddy lost it in court. It validated all the accusations made against him by the prosecution. A man who, while being shackled, felt invincible. His tirade, his inability to accept accountability, and his fixation on fitting in with the society. It exposed his worst fear. Not important, because he no longer had the story to tell. It spread like flames through the media. Every pundit, stream, and network had something to say. An empire's downfall. From millionaire to prisoner. Diddy's story is no more. And what looked to be confidence turned to denial when the video replayed on millions of screens. What looked to be charisma turned into anger. He was no longer being admired by the world. It was clearly watching. Diddy, meanwhile, adapted to a world he never could have predicted while incarcerated. The bespoke clothing, personal cooks, and command over his surroundings were all gone. Silence, lockdowns, routines, and uniforms took their place. He asked extra security. He desired seclusion. He sought legal powers, phone access, and business partner visits. However, his requests were merely a stack of papers. Now for prisoner 657321. Mr. Combs is now merely a prisoner. And something started to sink in during that quiet. There was no stop here. It was a sentence. He had used noise as a tool once. The walls that surrounding him now would not talk. His group tried to reconstruct the story. Press leaks, reports of unfair treatment, and tales presented as treachery, jealousy, and envy. However, the people no longer believed it. The man behind the music had hurt too many lives, too many voices, and too many receipts. Diddy was no longer able to stop a formerly hushed society from speaking.